Dorne is a very special land, with a slightly different cultural basis than the rest of Westeros. It was politically apart for a long time. It was also culturally apart because of the Rhoynar and the traditions they brought, but they didn't influence the rest of Westeros so much. George R. R. Martin on Dorne. The concept of the Prince or Princess of Dorne really stands out among the titles of Westeros for a multitude of complicated reasons. But the fact that even after the Dornish officially joined the Seven Kingdoms and the realm of House Targaryen, this title stands out and really sends a message to the reader that while Dorne did join the wider kingdom, they did so without bending the knee and keeping a degree of their independence, which is at the core of their culture. While concessions like their title were needed in order to make the unification happen, these very same concessions would lead to many of the underlying issues that led to the first Blackfyre Rebellion. But it goes even deeper. If you track the logic, you might even be able to make an argument that the simple concessions such as allowing the Dornish to still use the title of Prince or Princess may have indirectly contributed to the downfall of House Targaryen, very much thanks to the butterfly effect of several subsequent Blackfyre Rebellions, accumulating in the War of the Ninepenny Kings, which kind of began to lay the groundwork for House Targaryen's downfall. Given how important this title is, in this video we're going to be taking a look at the history of the title Prince or Princess of Dorne, the men and women who have held the title, and talking about its importance to the Dornish identity. For thousands of years before the unification of Dorne, it was mostly a patchwork of petty first men and then Andal kingdoms, which included the likes of the kings of the Torrentine, the kings of the Stone and Sky, and the different houses laying claim to the title of the High King of Dorne. During this time, House Martell were one of the more minor houses established since the coming of the Andals. But all that would change with the coming of the Rhoynar to Westeros. Sailing on 10,000 ships, Princess Nymeria led her Rhoynish people away from the Valyrian Empire to southeastern Dorne. After many years of perilous journeys, Nymeria married Lord Mors Martell of Sandship, forming the new house, Nymor Martell, and the Rhoynar intermarried with the bannermen of Mors. Nymeria named her husband Prince of Dorne, using the Rhoynish term instead of the Westerosi title of King. Hence, why the ruler of Dorne uses what is seen from a Westerosi perspective as a lesser title than King. The addition of the Rhoynish power allowed the Martells to conquer Dorne in Nymeria's wars, reducing the rival kings to vassals. The title of Prince was not all that was going to be different with this new Dornish kingdom. They would use the Rhoynish method of succession, where men and women were treated equally, and the eldest child, regardless of gender, is their mother or father's heir, with a ruling princess of Dorne also keeping the family name of Martell when they wed. Hence why the title Princess or Prince stands out, given the idea of a ruling queen was very rare occurrence and non-existent under House Targaryen. Dorne successfully resisted House Targaryen during Aegon's conquest and the First Dornish War, when Dorne was peacefully incorporated into the Seven Kingdoms during the reign of King Daeron II. The Dornishmen received concessions from the Iron Throne, unlike the other great houses. Among these were the right to retain the Dornish title Prince or Princess, while the rulers of the other regions of the Seven Kingdoms had been reduced to wardens or lords during the conquest and forced to give up their royal titles and crowns. The first Prince of Dorne we know of is of course Mors Martell, whom prior to becoming the prince was nothing more than a minor lord. When Nymeria led the Rhoynish refugees to Dorne, the lands of House Martell paled in comparison to those of their rivals, such as the kings of House Ironwood. The marriage of Mors and Nymeria gave the Martells the manpower needed to conquer the rest of the kingdom, and gave the Rhoynar a new homeland. Mors and Nymeria were co-monarchs, each with the respective title Prince and Princess, which is again something that's never happened before north of the Red Mountains, further distinguishing the title from a standard king or queen. Mors was killed by King Yorick V Ironwood in the Third Battle of the Boneway, but Nymeria carried on the fight and forced Yorick to submit 2 years later. Mors and Nymeria had 4 daughters, with the eldest of these daughters becoming the new Princess of Dorne after Nymeria's death. After Mors had died, Nymeria had remained the unquestioned ruler of Dorne for almost 27 years. The Though she remarried twice to Lord Alla of Hellholt and Sir Davos Dane of Starfall, her husbands served only as counsellors and consorts and had no ruling power. Over the course of her long reign, Nymeria survived a dozen assassination attempts, quelled 2 rebellions, and threw back 2 invasions by the Storm King Daeron III, and one by King Graydon Gardner of the Reach. As Nymeria became aged and infirm, the armies of House Martell were commanded by her heirs. When Mors and Nymeria's daughter died after a long rule as princess in her own right, her son, Mors, named for his grandfather, became Mors II Martell, the Prince of Dorne. Things now get very vague. Mors II's children are known as the Red Princes, each succeeding their father in turn. They are known as the Red Princes despite the fact that 2 of them were in fact actually girls and princesses. We have to jump forward to Aegon's conquest for our next Dornish ruler, Princess Meria Martell. By the time of the Wars of Conquest, Meria was already around 80 years old, fat and blind. The Storm King Arglak Durandon had nicknamed her the Yellow Toad of Dorne. Despite her age and blindness, her wits had not diminished, and she met the invasion of Aegon, Rhaenys and Visenya with steadfast opposition. So firm was her resolve that one Dornish knight claimed she would sooner see her people dead than alive as slaves of the dragon. Though her tactics successfully did repel the invading forces, some considered them cowardly and felt she fought through lies and treachery, an approach they attributed to her gender. She would become a never-ending thorn in the side of Aegon and his sisters. Meria eventually passed away in 13 AC, upon which her son, Nymor, became Prince of Dorne and immediately started negotiations for peace with House Targaryen, as the long and bloody war had begun to take its toll on both House Targaryen and the Dornish, with Dorne nothing but a dragon-fired blasted wasteland, burned several times over. Nymor sent his own daughter, Deria, to King's Landing to negotiate peace with Aegon. It did not seem that House Targaryen would be open to peace, with many openly opposing it, but Nymor had written a secret letter to Aegon in his own hand, which Deria gave the Dragon King. We do not know what was in that letter, what words moved Aegon and changed his mind, but he did agree to peace. Nymor would die in 23 AC, with his daughter Deria becoming the new princess. That very same year, King Aegon and his eldest son and heir, Prince Aenys, flew to Sunspear on their dragons, Balerion and Quicksilver, to attend a so-called Feast of Friendship, hosted by Princess Deria, to mark the 10-year anniversary of the peace accords. In 37 AC, Aenys succeeded his father as king, and was almost immediately opposed by 4 rebel factions. The largest and most threatening of these was the so-called Vulture King in the Red Mountains. Princess Deria publicly issued denouncements against the Vulture King from Sunspear, but many believed that she supported him in secret. We don't know much more about Deria's life, other than the fact she seemingly did have children, and died sometime before 49 AC. There is at least one unnamed Prince of Dorne who was alive around 61 AC. During this time, Knights of the Seven Kingdoms, under the command of King Jaehaerys and Rhaegar Baratheon, marched into the Red Mountains to eliminate a new Vulture King. The Prince of Dorne kept Dorne officially out of the conflict, leaving the Vulture King to his fate. His son, Morion, bristled at his father's apparent cowardice. When his elderly father died, Morion succeeded him as the new Prince of Dorne. He was still angered by his father's inaction during Lord Rhaegar and Jaehaerys' incursion into Dorne, and wished to wash away the slight with an invasion of his own into the Stormlands. He assembled a host at Ghost Hill and the Tor, and loaded Dornish spearmen onto the ships of pirates hired from the Sepstones, Cells from Myr, and corsairs from the Pepper Coast. He intended to land his armies on Cape Wrath, hoping to take the Stormlords, and thus King Jaehaerys, unawares. However, it took the prince nearly a year to load his host aboard the ships, and by that time, spies and friends of the Iron Throne, among Morion's own court and bannermen, had informed King Jaehaerys of the prince's plans. While Lord Bormund Baratheon awaited the Dornish on the shores of Cape Wrath, Jaehaerys and his sons, Aemond and Balon, took flight with their dragons and burned the Prince of Dorne's fleet. Not a single Dornishman made it to shore alive, and the Iron Throne did not lose a single man. Prince Morion also lost his life in the attempted invasion. He was succeeded by Meria Martell as Princess of Dorne. However, her connection to Morian is not clear. It is likely she was a daughter or a sister. During the reign of King Viserys I Targaryen, Maron Martell was the Prince of Dorne. In 110 AC, he joined the War for the Stepstones in support of the Triarchy when they warred against Prince Daemon Targaryen and Lord Corlys Velaryon, leading the Dornishmen in battles over the Stepstones. King Viserys considered wedding his daughter Rhaenyra to the prince as a way of bringing Dorne into the realm. However, Prince Coran had no interest in joining with House Targaryen. During the Dance of the Dragons, both the Blacks and the Greens courted Dorne's support, but Coran refused to take part in the war. When Sir Otto Hightower reached out to the prince personally, Coran spurned his offer and refused to take part in any war with dragons, recalling the First Dornish War and the damage it had done to Dorne. By 132 AC, Coran had passed away and was succeeded by his eldest child, Princess Aliandra Martell, whom was only 17 years old at her father's death. She saw herself as the new Nymeria and encouraged her lords and knights to prove themselves to her by raiding into the Dornish marches. In 113 AC, when Aliandra was 18, she met Lord Alan Velaryon during his first great journey when he campaigned to defend the Westerlands from the Ironborn and Lord Dalton Greyjoy. Alan had stopped at Sunspear to gather supplies. A book called Bastard Born claims that Alan had to provide intimate services to Aliandra before she allowed him provisions for his fleet, although another biography of Alan, called Hard as Oak, contradicts this tale. Aliandra met Alan again when he returned to the Sunset Sea on the way home from dealing with the Ironborn. Drazenko Roger, a Lyseni envoy, informed Alan that Prince Viserys, the lost brother of King Aegon III, was a captive of his brother Lysandro Roger in Lys, leading Alan to sail to bring the prince home to his brother. Alan would visit Aliandra multiple times over the years, and she showed him great favour. Alan's wife, Baela Targaryen, disliked hearing about Aliandra, which brought more fire to the tales of Aliandra and Alan's true relationship. Princess Aliandra was one of the greatest beneficiaries of the Daughters' War, with Dorne taking dominion over most of the Stepstones. Later during the Lysene Spring, she married Drazenko Roger and named him Prince Consort of Dorne and Lord of the Stepstones. But Drazenko viciously choked to death on bacon a few months later, with his death attributed to some faceless men of Braavos. But Aliandra was heavily suspected. There is an unnamed Prince of Dorne in 161 AC who bent the knee to King Daeron I Targaryen, the young dragon, bringing Dorne briefly into the realm of House Targaryen before Daeron was killed. He later discussed peace terms with the new king, King Baelor I, and the marriage of his eldest daughter, Meria, to Baelor's nephew, Prince Daeron, later King Daeron II, to seal the peace accords. Meria was in fact his heir, but the marriage to Daeron removed her from the line of succession. Thus, when this prince died, his son Maron, Prince of Dorne. After the death of King Aegon IV in 184 AC, Daeron, now King Daeron II Targaryen, began one of his most significant acts after assuming the throne, negotiating with Prince Maron Martell, his brother-in-law and ally, to bring Dorne under the rule of House Targaryen. The negotiations lasted 2 years. Negotiations included the proposal of a marriage between Maron and Daeron's younger sister, Princess Daenerys, once she came of age. The marriage would formally make Dorne part of the Seven Kingdoms. Prince Maron's wedding to the princess was held a year later in 187 AC in King's Landing. After the ceremony, Prince Maron knelt before the Iron Throne to swear oaths of fealty. Prince Maron had won a few concessions in his accords with the king to unite Dorne with the Seven Kingdoms. House Martell held significant rights and privileges the other great houses of Westeros did not. The right to keep their royal title first amongst them, but also the autonomy to maintain their own laws and the right to assess and gather their own taxes, with only irregular oversight from the crown and other such matters. Certain lords were dissatisfied by these concessions and believed that Dorne held too much influence over the king, as King Daeron brought many Dornishmen to his court, granting some notable offices. Some were particularly incensed by King Daeron's marriage to a Dornish woman and how he had sold his sister to the prince, believing that Daenerys had loved her half-brother Daemon Blackfyre, and that King Daeron had denied them. These elements were among the seeds that led to the first Blackfyre Rebellion in 196 AC, led by Daemon. When Maron died, it was his eldest son with Daenerys whom would succeed his father. To find our next known prince or princess, we must jump forward to the reign of King Aerys II Targaryen, where we have an unnamed Princess of Dorne, whom is the mother of Doran, Oberyn and Elia Martell from the main book series. She was seen as an effective ruler who did well when dealing with the changeable Mad King. Her biggest political achievement came towards the end of her reign. The princess was accompanied on a journey by her daughter Elia and her younger son Oberyn. From Dorne they travelled to several potential suitors for both Elia and Oberyn. Amongst the places they visited was Starfall, the Arbor, Old Town, the Shield Islands, Crakehall, and then finally Casterly Rock. Although she had learned of Joanna Lannister's death in childbirth while staying at Old Town in 273 AC, the princess decided to travel onwards to Casterly Rock regardless. Oberyn believes that his mother had planned to wed either Elia or Oberyn to one of Joanna's twins, Jaime and Cersei, since there had been an empty cabin on their ship meant for someone of high birth. Waiting until it was politely decent, the princess eventually broached the subject of marriage to Lord Tywin Lannister, Joanna's bereft husband. She first suggested a match between Cersei and Oberyn. Next, a match between Elia and Jaime. Tywin bluntly refused both matches, informing the princess how Cersei was meant to marry the crown prince Rhaegar Targaryen. When Tywin instead suggested his newborn dwarf son Tyrion to be betrothed to Elia instead, the princess took this as a grave insult. In 279 AC, the princess succeeded in betrothing Elia to Rhaegar Targaryen, to spite Tywin Lannister. By the time Elia married the prince in early 280 AC, the princess had already died. On her deathbed, she revealed to her son Oberyn how Tywin Lannister had refused her suggestions for betrothal, and she felt she had defeated him with Elia's betrothal to Rhaegar. At his mother's death in 280 AC, Doran Martell became the Prince of Dorne, and his time as prince would start with the difficult challenge that was the Mad King's growing instability, and soon Robert's Rebellion. Doran Martell is a complicated man, with an interesting and compelling story, a story we shall delve into in a video specifically about him, coming soon.